Heartbreaker, the once mighty meta set, flew a little too close to the sun and was nerfed from grace. Everyone moved on. But today we bring it back from the dead and show you exactly why Season 8 is where it belongs. What's good, everyone? Rognus here. Welcome to my channel where I do the math so you don't have to. Deep dives on build theory, gear optimization, and the stuff that actually matters, because when you're built different, you hit different. Now let's get it going. So Heartbreaker had his moment as one of the stronger sets in the game, with great damage and great survivability, all until it got nerfed and pretty much disappeared from the conversation overnight. Many players moved on to your Strikers, your Umbras, and now the new core strength gear set. They took over Heartbreaker and it just became one of those sets that people stopped talking about. But here's the thing about Season 8. As time's gone on and we've got increasingly difficult content, specifically like escalations, it's not content where you could just walk in with a glass cannon and delete everything. The enemies are going to hit you harder and the pressure is real. So if you can't sustain yourself, you're going to feel bad. That's exactly the environment where Heartbreaker thrives. Because this set doesn't just build damage, it builds survivability at the same time from the exact same mechanic. One loop, two jobs. So today we're restarting the Heartstopper. Now let's get into the build. So let's talk about what Heartbreaker actually does and why it works here. The 4-piece talent is called Heartstopper. Headshots apply a pulse for 5 seconds, and every hit on a pulsed enemy builds a stack. And each stack gives you plus 1.1% weapon damage and plus 1% bonus armor simultaneously. So the max stacks are going to be 50 by default, and that's pretty much it. You pulse, you stack, every stack you're getting weapon damage and armor at the same time. Super easy. Now the chest talent, max BPM, doubles your max stacks from 50 to 100. So it's doubling your ceiling, right? That's double the damage as well as double the armor. Now the backpack talent, cold, doubles the bonus armor you gain per stack from 1% to 2. So if you get 100 stacks, quick math, you're gonna have 200% bonus armor. So that's 110% weapon damage, 200% bonus armor from the same mechanic. Super sick. It's increasing our damage, obviously, as well as our survivability. And here's where it gets a little interesting, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to run the technician spec and we're going to grab that linked laser pointer, which means instead of having to play through the headshot mechanic to get the pulse, everybody you aim in is going to be pulsed. So no headshots to keep the loop up. Our primary LMG is actually going to run Flatline, as you can see, and that's going to give us 15% amplified damage to pulsed enemies. With the laser pointer, that's going to be 100% uptime, so it's always active. We've got 100% uptime on our pulse. So once we get into the full weapon setup, keep that in mind. And here's why that set works in escalation, right? Because the harder the content, the more you're shooting, the more opportunity you're going to have to build stacks and build those stacks fast. So for this build, the more shots you hit, the more stacks you get, as well as the more survivable you get. And it's all working together at the same time. So let's walk through this build piece by piece, okay? Starting with the mask, we've got the Tinkerer Exotic. All red traits, you've got your weapon damage, crit, chance, and crit damage. But the reason we have this here is actually going to be the talent, Abridged. If your primary and secondary weapons are not exotic or named, you guys know the talent. The second weapon talent actually gets applied to the first. So our first LMG already has Flatline on it. Our second LMG has Frenzy on it, which is giving us plus 35% weapon damage and plus 35% rate of fire on reload. So with the Tinkerer, we now get both talents at the same time, giving us another source of damage. And mathematically, the Flatline is actually amplified damage. It's not pooling additively with the weapon damage, it's actually its own multiplier. But we'll kind of get to that once we get into the damage breakdown. But we have a bunch of separate multipliers that are going to make this build hit really hard, as well as be sustainable. So let's go to the gloves. We're rocking the Contractors from Petrov Defense. And obviously it's going to be the best in slot glove for any LMG build. It's not really close. I guess if you were going to run exotic gloves, sure, the overdogs. But fixed secondary is going to be 8% damage to armor, which is important, again, because that sits in its own separate multiplicative bracket. It's not pooling it additively with your weapon damage, it's multiplicative, so that's more damage. It helps you cut down on all the chungas, right? The big armor targets in escalation. So that's exactly the damage profile you want. Okay, holster and knees, Heartbreaker, super easy. We're actually going to go with 2 blue cores on this build because we want enough base armor for cold to scale meaningfully. It's taking 2% of your armor, so we do want to stack that armor up a little bit so that we can actually have meaningful sustainability increases. All right, so what's this build actually look like ramped up? At 100 Heartbreaker stacks, we're going to have obviously 110% weapon damage. We're also going to have 200% bonus armor kicking in simultaneously, and that's going to be the baseline before anything else kicks in. So on top of that, you've got Frenzy on reload. That's going to add 35% weapon damage and 35% rate of fire into the pool. Then on top of that, we have Flatline sitting at its own amplified damage bracket, which is actually multiplying on top of that. All right, and then after that, we have another multiplicative bracket where the Contractor's 8% damage to armor is sitting, and that's going to be multiplicative on top of everything else. Okay, so I know it's kind of a lot, but in practice, all it means is the build has multiple damage brackets that are kind of going into each other, right? They're feeding each other, and your weapon is basically getting a lot of inflated damage. I could kind of go into how it all breaks down maybe in a different video if it's not making sense to you. Also, quick note, know that when you're putting these figures together, you're not actually multiplying by 8% in and of itself. Because it's an increase, you actually add 1 to their percentage. So you're not multiplying your weapon damage by 0.08 for the Contractors, because obviously you would get a lower number than you started with. So you would multiply it by 1.08. All right, that's kind of how that math breaks down. And to give you guys a little bit more math, right, I like to go into the crit profiles a little bit separately, and I want to do the base crit rolls from your gear itself, because everybody has different shade levels, right, different sources of crit. But at base, what I like to look at is we have 10 free rolls available to us on the build. Those are our available rollable attribute slots, as well as the modification slots, as well as from the weapon itself, because we're not using an exotic, so we have rolls there. For me, for at base, just to make the easiest, we're going to go 3 crit hit chance and then 7 crit hit damage, okay? So that's going to land us at 39% crit hit chance and 82% crit hit damage. Another thing I see all the time is everybody's trying to cram their way all the way up to 60% crit hit chance, but then they'll only have something like 60%, 70% crit hit damage. That actually does less effective damage for you. That's less beneficial to you than if you actually optimize your ratio. So your optimal ratio is pretty simple math. You want to have 2-to-1 crit hit damage to crit hit chance. That's going to put you within your optimal crit ratio and give you the highest effective crit damage. So effective crit damage is going to be your crit hit chance times your crit hit damage, okay? So in this case, we have 32% effective crit hit damage, meaning that we're expecting a 32% damage increase per bullet, all right? That's what effective crit hit damage is. That's your actual expected damage increase. But anyways, like I said, if you guys want to know more about that, that's something I can kind of get deeper in. I like to nerd out on those kind of numbers. On the survivability side, we have 200% bonus armor at 100 stacks scaling off your base armor. So that's why we're going 4 red and 2 blue as the base for mine on this one, because I want to have a good enough armor pool to make those stacks actually meaningful. I want to make it to where I can actually absorb punishment and keep shooting, okay? Because obviously the more you shoot, the faster you stack, and the faster you stack, the harder you hit, okay? That's the loop, it feeds itself, that's the build. So let's see more of the build in action. This is a solo heroic retaliation, but everything you're looking at applies to any PvE content. Group missions, legendary solo runs, as well as we saw earlier, even escalations. Anywhere where the content punishes you for not being able to sustain yourself, this build has the answer. Stacks building, bonus armor, and melting enemies all speak for itself. This is what a Heartbreaker build looks like when the loop is running cleanly. You're not relying on teammates to keep you alive, the build does that for you. You see, Heartbreaker never died, it just needed the right build to get the most out of it. As always, if this video helped you, do me a favor, like, subscribe, or leave me a comment. It goes a long way in helping me bring you more of the stuff that actually matters, because remember, when you're built different, you hit different. Thanks again.